you, everyone, and happy after the holidays. Hope everyone had a safe and wonderful holiday season. Welcome to the January 5th, 2021 Special Planning Commission Text Change Committee meeting. My name is CJ Mann, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. We are operating in a virtual environment and will likely be doing so in the foreseeable future. I would like to ask for patience as we use the platform for our meetings. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, presentations, and participants. If any participants have any issues with technology, please send a message to the moderator, Keegan McDonald. He is moderating today's meeting. We have one item on today's agenda. I would like for commissioners to hold all questions until the end of the presentation. Today we'll be talking about text change TC 8-20. Short-term rentals. This text change would amend the 10-part UDO to repeal the homestay regulations and replace them with regulations for short-term rental, a type of overnight lodging. It would also amend the UDO to allow short-term rentals in certain zoning districts that permit residential uses. On November 17th of 2020, our text change committee reviewed the text change as requested and alterations to the UDO that will create two categories of short-term rentals, hosted and unhosted, also limiting the number of days an unhosted short-term rental is available to 60 days per year, per calendar year, and require those rentals to have postings on site of all short-term rentals. The text change committee requested to the city council for a 45-day time extension on this case to review for any additional changes. And that review was voted unanimously by the Planning Commission 10-0 for that additional time allowance. Today we have a presentation from Mr. Justin Rometta and Mrs. Rebecca Badgett on TC 8-20. So Justin, Rebecca, I'm ready when you guys are.
Justin Rometta. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Justin Rometta, planning and development staff. I don't have a formal presentation for you all this morning. Mr. Chairman, as you noted in your summary, this committee had seen this and discussed this TC back in November of last year, and had requests for some more information. Ultimately went to the full commission, who recommended or requested an extension from council, which was granted. So if it's all right with you, in preparation for the December 1st meeting, city council meeting, when planning commission requested the extension, staff had prepared some revisions based on our discussion from the November meeting in case council did not grant your extension and just wanted to hear the ordinance at that time. They didn't, but we did upload that those suggested edits into your packets, which you have. You also should have a document from Ms. Badgett, who has graciously agreed to join us again this evening. If it's all right with you, I can just run through the changes that we made, since you all have last seen that quickly, and then
Yes, sir. That sounds great.
Okay, so looking at the document, short-term rental ordinance TCC suggested edits PDF would be the document that we'd be looking at here.
Is this a document with the highlights in yellow?
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it.
Yep. So we did I think three changes. You'll see on page 1, section 3, section E1, the bottom of page 1, we did add a two different types of categories, hosted and unhosted, for short-term rentals, and defined them both. At the bottom of page 2, sections I and J, we added the maximum 60-day rental availability language. Also added the requirement for posting of the permit number on the subject property itself and on all online advertisements. and those were the three. On page 3, you have some additional language where we just revised the fees to distinguish more closely aligned with our current fee structure. But the main changes are the ones highlighted at the bottom of pages 1 and 2. Again, creating two categories, hosted and unhosted, defining those, and then placing the limit of 60 days for available rental, and adding in the requirements for posting the permit number on the property itself and online. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. As you noted, Ms. Badgett is here as well. She did provide you all with some research, but I'm going to turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, and we're happy to help however you see fit.
As far as what we've just seen, because before we go, we've seen a lot of emails, I guess, in opposition to the 60-day calendar day proposal, text proposal. So I just wanted to just throw that out there because we've been getting numerous emails on the 60 days. So I just wanted to shed light to that so we could talk about that possibly a little bit. So Commissioner O'Haver, did you have anything?
I just was going to point out, Justin, you'll catch it eventually, but on item J, there's a typo on conspicuously, but
I saw that this morning. Yes. Thank you, Brian. We will change that.
Yeah. I've got some other comments, but I let's just move on.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Fox, did you have anything? I can't see you. Okay, I see you now.
Yeah, I did have a question. I don't know if we had discussed this previously, how our current draft relates to the draft that came out of that old task force on short-term rentals. This based on that, or was this based on something else? Justin's either frozen or mesmerized.
Are you talking about the version here with the changes from since your last meeting?
No, originally the version that we were given to make edits from. I wanted to know where the recommendations from that task force, if they had ever gotten rolled in.
That I do not know. We can certainly go back and look and see what those recommendations were and if they were incorporated into the original draft or not. But I don't know off the top of my head.
My read is they're fairly similar, except they are differing on a couple of points. One in terms of the penalties, and then the other one, that 60-day limit is different in our version versus that task force's version.
Well, the 60-day limit came from your November meeting.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I wanted to point that out to Chair Mann's point there, that version that came out of that task force that had met and discussed the item for a number of months had a limit that was greater than 60 days. And I didn't know if other commissioners, based on the public feedback we got and based on the results of that task force from previous years, were interested in revisiting that number.
Commissioner Tomasillo.
Yeah, I think that Commissioner Fox brings up a good point. I recently got a hold of that as well. I guess one question I did have, because I did see some of the input, I didn't know, and maybe this was interpretation collectively from all of us, but it seems like a lot of the comments, it's the thought that all all short-term rental would be limited at 60 days. So I think that there was definitely some confusion there, and want to make sure that it's very clear that that's not what it is. And yeah, I was going through, I also agree that the penalties should be that we discuss, and then and I'm fully open to reconsidering, if they went through this and they have a different number. I know that a lot of other communities have 90 or 120 days. And I also think that something that is important is that I think that we're all trying to take data-driven approaches to everything. And there's a lot of he said, she said going around about short-term rentals. And, we do have data on it. We just don't have that much. And I think that there should definitely be some form of, regardless of what we decide on, there should be 6-month check-ins on how this is, like how many applications there are, how many are permitted, how many are not permitted. Basically the status of it relative to the housing stock and relative to the growth or decline of them as well. But Commissioner Fox, I know I saw it, and my Microsoft Word crashed, and so I'm trying to find it again. Did you have it in front of you, or?
I can pull it up.
While she's doing that, Mr. Tomasula, I just wanted to let you know that the text is clear and that currently as written, the 60-day limit only applies to the unhosted category.
Yeah.
The type where it's the rental of an entire dwelling unit at a time.
Correct. Yeah, I know there are a lot of emails about that it helps, supplement people's mortgage and rents and everything that we have written, Justin, does not impact people to be able to share their current house that they rely on, correct?
Correct. That standard would not be applicable to those.
Yeah.
Commissioner Fox, I was waiting on you if you found the document that you were looking for.
Is there a piece in particular you were asking me?
I thought it was the number of days for the whole house.
While we're waiting on Commissioner Fox, Mr. McDonald, how many speakers do we have signed up to talk to this point?
Hello, Chairman Mann. So there were 2 that contacted us prior to the meeting. At present, I think both of them are on the line. And I also did receive a comment in the chat from one of the attendees who it seems like they would like to make public comment as well. So,
Okay.
When you'd like to hear from them, and I can go through that list.
Okay, will do. And Ms. Rebecca Badgett, did you have anything to add before we opened it up to the public? Is Rebecca on? Okay.
Thank you. I think you had to unmute me. The only thing I have to add is that you all might want to consider how the accessory dwelling units will fall into this ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be considered a hosted rental if the host is on site in a primary residence, the main residence, or is it an unhosted rental?
Okay. And did you have any insight as to what the previous limit of days were? I'm seeing a comment from Commissioner Fox that we couldn't find that.
I don't think there was a previous limit that I recall, but I remember being asked to get sort of information about what the common limits are,
Okay. Thank you.
but I'm not positive about the old ordinance.
Commissioner Thompson.
I guess a follow-up question is, I believe in the first time we chatted, you said it generally a lot of the limits are from 90 to 180 days. Is that correct?
The average seems to be about 95 days when jurisdictions decide to cap rentals.
Okay. Okay. I guess one other question, as far as from high-level research goes, as far as violations go, is there somewhat of some standards rising to the top?
I'm sorry, I missed the very first part of that question.
As far as violations go, making sure that everyone's following the proper rules and getting their stuff permitted, and if there are complaints, that they're vetted and that there is accountability.
It's hard to say. I think a lot of people don't get permitted. That's been a problem overall. And tracking who's getting permitted is even more difficult because you can't tell where these rentals might be if they're not actually coming to you for the zoning permit. So it's a lot of relying on neighbors to maybe keep their neighbors honest and say you need to go get permitted.
Okay, thank you. I guess that leads to a question to Justin. I know that some folks told me that we are a pilot city for Airbnb's kind of accountability and data tracking. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
So the city was one of, I want to say, maybe 8 or 9 cities that Airbnb decided to pilot this new their new data sharing platform with, I believe it's called AirDNA, that will hopefully be able to give us a lot of insight going forward and data as far as number of rent, who's renting these places, how often they are being rented, where they are, that demographic type information, I believe, as well. That's kind of as far as my understanding of it goes at this point. I think until we've had a chance to actually evaluate our the Airbnbs within Raleigh against it. I don't know much else to say about it at this point than that.
Okay. Thank you.
Keegan, can you please show the screen, if you can, with that the Word document?
Yes, give me one moment. Okay, are you all able to see this?
Yes.
Okay. And Commissioner Fox, is this the correct document that you
I'm not entirely familiar with the different levels that they have articulated here, just differentiating what we were calling hosted and unhosted. They've used different language, but it does appear to be some limitation, bottom of page 6, Keegan. Oops, I have the wrong page for you. Sorry, wait. They do articulate the number of days that the host had to be on site. Which was, if I'm not mistaken, 270 days.
I see 181. But that, I guess, because it's a little bit different, I guess that the fact that it's unhosted, I guess that would kind of probably fall into the bucket of unhosted, I would assume. It's not necessarily apples to apples, but.
Hey, Matt, if I could, for the benefit, just as I was thinking through this stuff last night, and I'm sure some of you all have already done this math, but just to try to put some scale to it. If we took 52 weeks of the year and we took Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and someone were to rent that unhosted unit for all 52 of those weeks, it's 156 days. Just to put some scale to it. If we're talking about short-term rentals being 30-day rentals, and again, I'm not sure how this is enforced on whether or not someone stays for more than 30 days or 60 days or whatever. But again, just to try to put some scale to it, if we said they did full 30-day rentals, and they did that for 4 months, which is 1/4 of the year, that equals 120 days. And then if we bumped it to 5 months, again, thinking about the emails that we received, et cetera, and trying to really try to find a balance between minimizing the negative impacts and maximizing the positive impacts. We bumped it up to 5 months, it equals 150 days, roughly 30-day months, right? I'm just putting some general numbers. And so just maybe that might add some perspective as we're thinking about the days. And again, if it's truly 30-day rentals and that's what people are abiding by versus beyond being a long-term rental, which is my understanding. If I'm wrong about that, David, let me know. But so just to put some scale to it.
Thanks. And I think, I guess, just for clarity, you're meaning 30 days or less?
Well, correct. The one way I looked at it was if someone wanted to rent it and were able to rent it every single weekend for a long weekend, 3 days times 52 is 156 days. But if someone had the opportunity to use the full 30-day rental or 30-day or less, right? But I'm just saying, let's just say they maximize it and they're able to do the full 30 days. And it was, if the limit was around 150, 156, I would allow them to rent their unhosted out for 5 months out of the year at full 30-day rentals, just to again put some scale to it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Fox.
Based on that, I'm comfortable increasing the number of days if it's also coordinated with the reporting that Commissioner Tomasulo mentioned, and some additional conversation about penalties.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the only other variable I think maybe Brian was talking about and I maybe left out was whether or not it's, I think Brian, you were talking about consecutive months versus non-consecutive months.
I was just talking about total number of days.
Okay.
And trying to put some scale to the number. Also, just to throw out there, because again, I felt like in our last conversation, 60 days was short too. But again, after reading more and getting emails, et cetera, I'm with you, Roberta, comfortable looking that number up. Everything I've read, obviously, I think we all agree that it's important to monitor this closely again because there are benefits and there are negative consequences that are occurring throughout the country on this. So we need to be smart about it. But I also read that in some other cities, if they want to go beyond the minimum limit, so let's say we set it at whatever, X number of days is not the minimum, the maximum. I'm sorry. You can do it for X maximum days throughout the year. Some other cities do have the ability to request special approval and or pay additional fees to expand that maximum number. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I thought that was interesting, something I read last night when I was doing some, I hate to call it research, when I was doing my Google.
And if I could point out just make one point of clarification on the draft that was revised that has the highlights in it. If you look at use standard I, number 2I, unhosted short-term rentals shall only be available for rent for terms less than 30 days. Okay, we define a short-term rental as a 30-day, but if someone's doing 30-day rental, that's basically a month-to-month. That would qualify as a month-to-month. It would, under our definition, still be a short-term rental, but it's more traditional housing, month-to-month rental, than, less than 30 days. And so the limit of 60 days per calendar year is for those less than 30-day rentals. Does that make sense? So you could market it for 30-day rental max and create a hybrid month-to-month. And it would more accurately reflect the housing market, because many renters are in extended month-to-months. And so the limit of 60 calendar days would be for those properties that are marketed for less than 30 days. Does that make sense? It's a slight difference.
But
the way this is drafted, it encourages short-term rentals of 30 days.
Commissioner O'Haver.
Sorry, TJ, I know we're supposed to be raising our hand. We're just all jumping in there. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
So David, to make sure I'm clear, you're saying less than 30 days, i.e. 29 days?
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. I got it.
Or that weekend situation you were talking about.
Right. I was just using round numbers, but no, that clarification's.
Now, our definition on page 1 says no longer than 30 days. The 60-day limit only applies to less than 30 days. And that was because I helped draft the proposed edits based on the discussion you guys had at your last meeting as a committee. My takeaway, and I could be incorrect, and y'all correct me if I'm wrong, was that your concern was taking this out of the inventory of traditional housing. And 30-day rental is a traditional housing rental. And so that's why I capped the 60 days for when someone's offering their property for less than 30 days. I thought that was more reflective of where you guys were leaning. Now that may be wrong, but I was trying to get inside your heads based on the discussion. And so if that's wrong, then we would change I to say for terms of not longer than 30 days. Then it would reflect the short-term rental definition. So y'all would just need to give us guidance on how you want that 60-day limit employed.
So quick question. Yeah, that's fine. Quick question, David. So in theory, we can have under this model 12 different tenants at a residence or short-term rental, 12 different tenants for 29 days. Would that be feasible?
Not with that limit, not with I as it's currently worded.
Mm-hmm.
With I as it's currently worded, if your rent periods were 29 days or less, you're limited to 60 days, or whatever cap you would choose to put on there. if your rent is for a minimum of 30 days, yes, you could have 12 tenants in property for 30 days each. But they would have to be there all month. The lease term would have to be there all month.
Commissioner Thomas-Sewell.
Yeah, and I guess isn't 30 days or more, like basically quote unquote month to month, isn't that technically long-term rental?
It can be. I mean, because you have months that are 30 days and one that's less than 30 days. A 30-day rent that has, say, a renewal option is basically a month to month. Okay? On average, it's a month to month. The definition, as originally drafted, of short-term rental was not longer than 30 days. So it would allow a 30-day rental to be treated as a short-term rental. Okay? That's how the draft is worded. And so when I came up with that language for I, and it may have been a team effort, but so I guess I don't remember a lot of what happened before the holidays. But anyway, no, the idea was to try to, if someone was going to take advantage of a short-term rental ordinance, but was going to have their property for a more traditional month to month, wanted to do month to month, then they wouldn't have a 60-day cap, because then they're only renting their property for 2 months and then it's out. And so that's why I said less than. Okay, so if your rentals were for 30 days each, under the code, you're still month to month. I mean, you're still short-term rental because it's 30 days, but you wouldn't be capped at 60 days. I feel like I'm confusing folks, but I don't mean to.
Commissioner Thomas.
It sounds like that update to the language in general would be valid, to just make sure that it's reading that. Should it be 29 days or less? You're the attorney, but I guess just so that there isn't confusion, because I guess.
Yeah, we could make it 29 days or less. I don't have a problem with that, but that was, if that would be the preference, but that was why that language is slightly different than the definition of short-term rental. Was you seem to be concerned about negating the unintended consequence of taking too many properties off the inventory for traditional housing. So that's why we distinguish between 30 and 29.
Commissioner Haber, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so I think maybe I get it, but I think we all do this. We try to rephrase it, David, to make sure I understand what you just said. And whether it's a term of less than 30 or not more than 29, either way, what I think I heard you just say was that what you're trying to do with the wording there is to not confuse or allow a short-term rental, technically a short-term rental, to be of 30 days and then just continue to do 12 different tenant or one tenant, but it be considered a short-term rental. You're trying to distinguish between short-term rental and long-term rental, and that number is 30. And so if it's a short-term rental, you're saying if you do it for 29 days, you can only do 2 of those consecutively before you've got to say, okay, you're no longer a short-term rental, you're now a long-term rental. Is that right? Or that's not a good look for you, David? I think I just confused you.
Idea was if the property owner is offering the property for rent of a term of 30 days, okay, that still falls in this ordinance's definition of a short-term rental. but 30 days is more reflective of traditional housing rent lease term, you know? And so if it's 30 days, if they're offering it for 30-day rentals, even though we define that as short term, I didn't think we should cap them to 2 months. I didn't think that was your intent if they were really renting it for 30 days. Because your concern was taking that house, that dwelling, out of the inventory of traditional housing. And so that's why if you were offering it for less than 30 days, you had the cap. But if you're doing it for 30 days, you didn't have the cap. You're still short-term rental under the code, but you don't have that 60-day cap or whatever cap you would choose to put in there.
Commissioner O'Haver.
So if we change that 60 to whatever, let's just go up incrementally 90 days, whatever that number is we decide on. And under the short-term rental, you could keep someone there for 90 days under the short-term rental, not the more traditional, not the more traditional renting options. Because again, I think we mentioned in my neighborhood, I've got a handful of these, and it did seem like there was a family that lived there for 3 months, and they had their big boxes out, and they had plenty of room. They weren't on the street. They had their boxes there for 3 months, and then they left. I think that's a good thing, right? Like that's what we're not trying to eliminate that. We're trying to do exactly what you said and balance those opportunities with taking housing off the market. So I think that makes sense to me, but I'm interested in the other commissioners' opinion, but I still think 60 days might be low, regardless of whether or not they're consecutive or not.
Yeah, Commissioner O'Haver, I agree. I think 60 days, even for Airbnb throughout the year, as you mentioned, 156 days, Friday through Sunday. It's quite feasible in certain people's instances. So I think 60 we should relook at 60 and try to do something about it with raising it. Commissioner Thomas, I saw your hand, or did I?
I was just going to say I agree with Commissioner O'Haver and you. I mean, I think that if someone's staying for a couple of months, that's in my opinion long-term rental, regardless of what it's classified as in the code, and like that's necessary housing. I guess it's the real thing that we talked about prior was houses being fully taken off for housing, which again with the context that 2 or 3 month rental is housing, but renting every weekend for 3 months out of the year is to different parties every weekend is a business as opposed to housing. And so just how we want to consider that and how that is impacted by a lot of what Blanny was talking about with these iBuyers, if that would mobilize them to be able to continue to drive up sight unseen purchases, et cetera, in this market and make enough money off of 3-day minimum rentals, making $600 or $800 a weekend with a steep cleaning fee.
Keegan, let's go to the two members of the public. Let's take a break and go to the two members of the public and see if they have any comments that we can respond to, and then we'll move forward. Keegan, did you hear me? Not knowing what happened to the host. Let's see. Well, while we're waiting for Keegan, let's talk about the amount of days that we might want to have increase that 60 days to, while we're waiting on the public comment. I think
I would like to just add one thing that might help you think about the number of days is that, sorry, this is Rebecca Badgett. I can't raise my hand. That the Vacation Rental Act in North Carolina defines a vacation rental as any rental for 90 or fewer than 90 days. So up to 89 days is what a vacation rental is technically defined as in North Carolina statute. So that could give you a framework if you wanted to mirror that language, would be to go with an 89-day cap as an option. But you can always make it less. There's no problem with that, but just thought I'd point that out.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Commissioner Thompson.
Just to clarify that, Rebecca, are you saying 89 days total with like cumulative stays? Is that?
Yes, the act applies to any rentals and the period is up to 89 days. They'll call that a short-term rental. I think this all came about way before Airbnb was popular, but long-term beach house rentals where you'd be allowed to stay up to 89 days and still get to take advantage of all the protections afforded in the North Carolina Vacation Rental Act. Obviously, many jurisdictions are stipulating that the stay is shorter than 89 days now for it to be a short-term rental, like 29 or 30 days, which makes sense. You're sort of creating a different lodging use under your zoning authority. You could look at it as a framework of general reference, since the Vacation Rental Act allowed a stay of up to 89 days to be considered a vacation rental. If you wanted to sort of just go with an 89-day cap, obviously it wouldn't be 89 days consecutively.
So that's 89 days per resident or per dwelling?
It can fall under the protections of the Vacation Rental Act, which just sort of allows some landlord tenant protections to, be able to evict somebody quickly. Things anyone could take advantage of if they're under the 89 days too. So you're not taking anybody out of the ability to get protected by the Vacation Rental Act if you shorten the days. It's just one idea is to kind of mirror the idea of the 89-day cap makes a vacation rental. Not by the day, but in total. Not by the actual stay. Like you'd still stays for 29 days, but your cap of the number of days you're allowed to rent during the year, 60, could be 89.
Well, what if in the case that there were different tenants, is it still 89 days?
Under the law right now, it's 89 days by state statute, only to take advantage of some protections afforded by the Vacation Rental Act. So local governments are welcome to define it as a stay of 29 days or a stay of 15 days, wherever you want to do. The state just has extra rules that apply if between the renter, the homeowner, and the vacation rental property, or like the leasing agreement and the tenants, so that they can have different protections afforded to them.
Commissioner Thompson, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I guess the one question I've had is that, I guess vacation is a little bit different than short term.
Right.
And I guess depending on how the language is used, I guess the main thing I just want to avoid that we get confused with is, I mean, regardless of if someone books on Airbnb or has a month-to-month lease through a property manager here who has boots on the ground in Raleigh, 30-plus day rentals are incredibly common. Month-to-month rental is incredibly common. And I just want to make sure that we don't, impact that at all or create any confusion where every single lease that's month to month in the community would be considered, short-term or vacation rental or short-term housing. So
Right, that makes sense. If you define it as short-term rental, I think you're good. You're not saying
okay.
they're all vacation rentals.
Okay. Keegan, can you hear us?
Yes, I apologize about that. I was having some connection issues.
Okay.
Two speakers. The first is, I hope I pronounced this right, Bolton. And I can go ahead and unmute them now.
Yes, sir. Please unmute the speaker.
Okay, Bolton, you are unmuted. It appears that they have muted themselves, so I will move.
This is Bolton. I didn't sign up to speak.
Okay, my apologies,
I'm sorry.
sir. Not a problem. We'll move on to the next speaker. The next speaker is Tom Anhut. I will go ahead and unmute now, Tom.
Yeah, hi. I only signed up to monitor the meeting. I also did not sign up to speak. But while I'm at it, Happy New Year, all.
I was going to say, Tom, that's rare for you, Tom.
You know what? I thought I would start the year off nice to you, Brian, but the heck with that.
Chairman Mann, there are two people who have messaged me in the chat that wish to speak that prior to the meeting. I'm not sure if you'd like to hear from them, but I'm happy to. So
yes, please allow those two speakers.
Okay. The first is Andrea Kirchner. Andrea, I'm unmuting you now.
Hi. Hi. Thank you for listening to me. I'm a little bit frazzled. My thoughts are kind of all over the place. Can you see me, or is it just my voice?
Just your voice, but can you give us your address, please?
I'm over in the Cameron Village area.
Okay.
I am an Airbnb host. So I just wanted to kind of speak. I just have a few little points here and there. Obviously, I'm opposing putting any kind of limit on the days to vacation rental. I think it's unfair and unjust. I think the residential new home sales were record breaking this year. The bottleneck with the supply of homes for sale is overregulation and UDOs that drive up the cost of new homes. So I'm not really understanding where blaming vacation homes and short-term rentals is driving the issue with homes available. This short-term rental, vacation homes, it's all very similar to agritourism, urban tourism, and it gives people a real sense of the city. There's a huge need for this, and it's the future. It's just absolutely fulfilling a need that is there. I can't express to you how often I hear that from my customers, and especially now during COVID. It's been a huge help to many people. Just think for yourselves how often you've used a service like this, or your family or your friends have used a service like this in other cities. People come here as they're house hunting. It's a huge help to them. I think it's unjust to have a blanket legislation that blocks all such rentals in the city. I think we need to concentrate more on enforcing the rules that are already in place for bad landlords. That's a huge issue. And party houses, college houses that are in neighborhoods such as mine. Those are the real issues. Those are what need to be cracked down on, not Airbnbs. Airbnb, they crack down on issues. Most Airbnb hosts are very responsible hosts. Back to the whole, this is a huge income for so many people. People have suffered a lot this past year. So to put a restriction on it is very much damaging a lot of people's incomes. So I think that's pretty much all I have. I guess, other than it messing with the residential homes that are available, I guess my biggest question is just what is the biggest driving factor in this of wanting to put such a limit on this?
Thanks, Ms. Kirchner. Commissioner O'Haver, I see your hand.
Yes, and I didn't catch, was that Ms. Kirchner? Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just a couple quick questions just to help me frame your situation. I'm curious how many years you've been involved in short-term rentals. I'm wondering if you have any data on what your sort of average yearly days of rental are. Again, as we're trying to understand the scope and scale of if we put a number of days, I know you're against it, so I'm not necessarily pushing for that right now, but since that's what's on the table, just trying to understand the scale. So I'm curious how many years, what your data shows, and then are you hosted or unhosted? Because again, I think the 60 days is for unhosted only. So I just want to make sure, again, we're comparing apples to apples.
I am unhosted, which means I do not live in the dwelling. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Yep. Unhosted, and I'm pretty new, so just coming up on a year.
And so what was your average, even if you have to expand it?
Yes, I would say it's occupied 60 to 70% of the time.
Okay. So of 70% of 365 days?
I would say so, yeah, probably.
Okay. Okay. And I'm not going to hold you to it again. I'm just trying to, that's helpful. Thank you.
It stays busy, but of course, this past year was COVID, and I think it was busier because of COVID. This is the outlet. This is what people need. This is how people were still able to come visit their family. This is how people were still able to come and go to weddings.
Commissioner Thomas-Olo.
Yeah, and I guess part of this discussion that we're having, Andrea, and at the beginning meetings that we had, a huge question is, and this is where there's varying angles and lenses to it, is, there's some people who say it's kind of sharing, and so it's helping subsidize costs. But then there are a lot of people who have one or multiple units, and it's a business. And so the challenge for us is that no other businesses are allowed in residential districts, and that's how most of the US works. And so what we're trying to understand and wrestle with is how we can go and not allow, say, a yoga studio in a single family house, but allow 4, 6, or 8 people to stay there like a hotel, and not pay the same amount of permit fees, increased utility costs, environmental reviews, et cetera. And so that's just some of where, through the lens that we're trying to evaluate it, is we're trying to understand it as how it's positioned in our city right now.
Okay.
And that's all in the context of accessible housing, which
I can totally understand, and I think
or don't agree with, different zoning intensities in Raleigh. We do have a real commitment to housing in this city. So.
Right, and I totally am with you on, maybe it shouldn't be allowed in some areas, maybe it should. So in my particular situation, I live right across from a medical office. I've lived here for 10 years. That building was not there, and so in my opinion, how can that be there on my residential street, but an Airbnb can't, right? So maybe it is a zoning issue. In a lot of areas for Airbnbs, it comes down to HOAs. HOAs crack down on that. I get it. I get why Airbnbs shouldn't be allowed in a residential neighborhood that has an HOA. So I do understand where there could be, leniences or differences and zoning differences. I get that. I also understand that there should be permit fees. I mean, the city does get, 14% of our revenue, of Airbnb revenue, I think, in taxes and sales. But maybe, permit fees, okay, we're all willing to pay those, but not to have a limit of days.
And I guess just for clarity, the occupancy and sales and use taxes, just for clarity, I have it in front of me, is paid by the people staying. It's not paid by the hosts.
Well, regardless, I mean, it's income producing, correct, to the city.
Sure.
Keegan, is the second speaker ready? I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Haver, before we go to
Yeah,
Keegan.
sorry, and this doesn't go directly to Ms. Kirchner's comments, but again, it's something that I keep having to bring myself back to center on. And if I recall, I haven't been able to pull it up, but I think I remember the intent coming from council is to increase housing affordability. And to me, in my mind, and maybe Matt or Roberta or CJ, you can help me with this. We're talking about housing affordability and housing versus rentals. And to me, that's not the same thing. I've got a perfect example. I'm looking out my window at a house across the street that there was a family that rented that house for 2 years from out of town, and they were here doing business. The house was sold, it's bought, they've moved it into short-term rental, and that family that was living here now has had to move out, and now they're trying to find other affordable housing in this neighborhood as the costs continue to go up.
Correct.
For short-term rental. So for me, I'm trying to distinguish between housing affordability and dealing with those issues versus dealing with short-term rentals. We're talking about short-term rentals here, and I'm struggling with how short-term rentals are helping housing affordability. Am I just dense?
I'm completely with you. And I'm failing to understand how Airbnbs and short-term rentals impact anything.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe this is the forum again. I was reading, again, not researching, Googling a number of articles, and I think it's evident that there is not a lot of data nationally, and that there are unintended consequences and there are benefits, and there are a lot of communities that are struggling with this because it absolutely impacts both of those issues. So it's real. I don't know that I can show it in math, but I mean, if and this is coming from like Urban Land Institute. This isn't coming from the local independent newspaper or something. Not our local independent, just any. I'm just saying it's from. Anyways, I'm just struggling with that a little bit. But let's maybe hear from the other speaker.
Keegan, do you have the second speaker ready?
Yeah, the other person who messaged me was Jake Mercer, I believe. So I'll go ahead and unmute Jake now.
Hey guys, can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you guys for having me on, and thank you for the consideration of my question. My question is both a clarification and a quick understanding for the reasoning behind the unhosted category for whole dwellings. I'm just seeking clarification for unhosted dwellings, and does that apply to multifamily units? Or does that only apply to residential homes if that were going to be a permanent text change regarding the 60-day cap? I just wanted to reiterate that the following text change in the ordinance mentions 25% multifamily units being used for short-term renting. So if that is the case, does that mean that short-term rentals and multifamily housing units, do they fall under the 60-day cap category? And I just want to say that I don't think it should be because if these text changes are for traditional housing and the issues that comes with residential neighborhoods and the safety and the parties and whatnot, I'm not sure how that would be geared towards residential units if those are up to the discretion of the property owners and property management teams.
Does anybody from city staff want to tackle that answer?
Yeah, I can answer that. A previous draft of this ordinance did not have any allowance for short-term rentals in multifamily buildings. This draft does allow it, and if someone were to rent an entire unit, an entire residence that's in a multifamily building, it would be considered unhosted, and it would be limited to 25% of the number of units in the building, or 2 dwelling units, whichever is larger.
Got it. So to clarify, would it fall under the 60-day cap as well, or no?
Yes.
As currently worded, yes.
Okay, so I'm confused about the reasoning for that, because it is my understanding that if someone is on site using their unit for Airbnb or short-term rental, then that would be considered subletting, which in my understanding is mostly illegal with most apartment buildings. But if the case is the apartment unit is being used for corporate housing, for corporate traveling clients staying for a week looking for furnished studios since they need to work remotely, my ask is that if there is a mutual understanding between the property management team and the unit being used, then I don't understand why there would need to be a text change and there would need to be restrictions for multifamily uses. Because if this whole text change ordinance is for traditional housing and preventing commercial companies picking up these larger houses in neighborhoods, I'm not sure how that would affect apartment buildings.
Commissioner Thompson.
I guess this is kind of building off of conversations that we had in other meetings, but the conversations that we had were, so most multifamily is in non-residential zoning districts or I guess all mixed use districts. And so they're all under commercial code. And if, there's a building going up right now downtown that is apartments and a hotel. And I guess our question was, well, if there's a 200 unit apartment complex and there's 50 short-term rentals in there, isn't that just a hotel, and can't they just be filed under a hotel? And so that was the conversation that we had, because there's other health inspections and a bunch of other regulations that go with transient short-term rental related to hotels. And, we're not here to debate whether they should have to go through environmental health like any other, commercial place of business. But we didn't really understand the logic of 25, 50, 100 units, if they're 25% of a residential building of an apartment complex, it's a commercial structure, like what the purpose was of that. And with full understanding that, executive lodging, et cetera, it's all usually, I'm pretty familiar with it, it's all usually over 30 days, and that isn't impacted by this.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from.
We had in some previous meetings, just.
Yeah, I get it. I've been listening in a few of the previous meetings as well. And I guess it's here nor there, arguing the reasoning for having short-term rental capacities in apartment housing, because I think the apartment hotel industry is a big upcoming industry with bigger companies working with these apartment complexes to provide housing and furnished spaces in bigger spaces than hotels can provide. So people feel a bit safer and able to social distance, in my opinion. And I do think there are corporate travelers that come for less than 30 days. I don't think they only come for 30-day plus stays. But all I'm asking is just to relook at the idea for 60-day caps on multifamily units, for the being that if it's run by a professional corporate housing company and they already have to do background screening on the residents staying there that have to abide by community guidelines, I just don't see there's a huge risk there for residential safeties and residents nearby. So thank you for the consideration.
Thank you. Keegan, is that all the speakers that we have signed up for the public, or are there more?
At this time, I believe that's everyone that's messaged me.
Okay. All right. Commission, what do we feel moving back towards this conversation on the 60 days, bumping that up to a number. I know we heard, I think it was 79 days for the state statute for vacation rentals. Um, I don't know if that's something that we want to entertain or what, but I'm open to listening to what we think about moving those days up. Commissioner Thompson, I see your hand.
Oh, sorry, I was fixing my camera.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Quickly, just a point of clarification, the 90-day limit for vacation rentals, that's a single rental. That's the cap on a single rental. That's saying
Right.
you want to rent a beach cottage for the entire summer, for all 3 months of the summer.
Mhm.
So that's the 90-day limit. That's not a cap on how long that beach house how many nights it could be rented short-term rental throughout the whole year. That's a cap on one rental
Mm-hmm.
to enable the landlord to have an abbreviated eviction and certain other rights.
Got it. I was unclear on that. So it's 90 days per renter. Got it. Okay. Commissioner O'Haver, I saw your hand.
I was just going to say, like, I think that was just, again, for a point of reference. I'm okay looking at a higher number than that. That still seems a little short for me for what we're trying to accomplish and to allow the flexibility for the benefits to remain. So I understand and I appreciate that point of reference, but I would probably be in favor, if the rest of the commission was, on looking at a number a little bit north of that.
Mm-hmm. So you say 156, as you mentioned earlier, or?
I don't know that I was ready to give one, but yeah, I mean, for me, that would cover all 52 weeks for 3-day weekends. It would cover 5 months out of the year of, I guess, 29-day rentals. Because otherwise, again, it would seem to me that if you needed to do more than 5 months at 30 days, then you would be looking to do a long-term. You wouldn't be looking for a short-term rental opportunity there. Again, just as a point of reference, not that someone's looking to rent their either whole house or unit for 30-day periods. I'm just saying, if somebody did have that opportunity and it went beyond 5 months, that seems to me that would be a long-term rental. And if someone did have the ability to take all 3-day weekends for the entire year, that's 156 days. And I do think we should entertain the ability, if it makes sense, because again, we talk about this all the time about either unintended consequences or putting policy in place that restricts what we're trying to accomplish. I thought it was interesting, again, as I mentioned, I read last night, that we consider building in an opportunity under special occasions to be able to either pay additional fees or to be able to come back and make a case for why you need more than 156 days. And if that makes sense, then why wouldn't we do it? We're not trying to restrict this. We're trying to be protective. We're not trying to be punitive.
Okay. Commissioner Thomas.
I guess to make sure I understand something that you keep saying, Brian, you keep bringing up 5 months. Are you just saying that that's just a relative amount of time?
Yes, I'm just saying, if so I'm not in the business, but if I was, I'm not saying that I'm sitting here advertising for 5 29-day months. I'm just saying it for scale of reference for a total number of days. If by chance I was in the business and I had an opportunity to put 5 consecutive 29-day rental periods together, to me, anything more than that starts to get to what you were getting at earlier, this sort of long-term rental. The example I gave of the folks that live across the street for me for a year and a half that were just doing 30-day payments, but they were able to live there. That to me is different than a short-term rental. So to me, when I put it in perspective of 156 days equaling roughly 5 months, just as a sort of as a frame. To me, that's kind of pushing the upper limits of what I would think of would be a short-term rental when you get to that point if you were to congregate them all together. I guess it's just trying to put it in my head on framing the number of days and what seems reasonable and fair.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not in the business, so that's just my perspective.
You know, I think your anecdote is important, where you saw a family that was living there. They got displaced directly by someone who wanted to run, you know, who wanted to operate an Airbnb. That happened across the street from me as well. And so that's two of us who just happened to be on this small committee. And so, you know, I understanding that it is a business for people, but it hasn't, you know, admittedly, it also has not been legal business for anybody for Whole House in the term of Raleigh. But you know, I agree that there should be a longer term. And again, I guess just reiterating, it's like I think that measuring this stuff, whether and being flexible to either limit the number of days or increase the number of days is important. And, you know, something else that we didn't address was the violations. And I think some of that is, in my mind, I guess it's making sure that people get registered and actually register with the city to operate so that we have that information. I guess since so many of these properties utilize Airbnb and they seem to have data now that they're going to be sharing with the city, we will probably be able to understand who is registered with the city and who isn't. But you know, I guess it's just, I just didn't know if for the communities that are trying to just hold operators accountable, if Rebecca had any thoughts on what we have versus how we could improve that.
Rebecca, are you still online?
I'm still online, yes.
Okay.
I think that's just a tough area. You have a pretty good section on you know, penalties. I think you need to make sure you only stay within the confines of what's allowed through zoning. So that's going to put an important sort of lens on what you can do as far as enforcement. Make sure that, you know, you don't start pulling in other kinds of penalty sections that would sort of violate what you can do within the confines of the ordinance drafting. But one thing you can do is make sure that when you have the requirements that people register their zoning permit number on the website. So that's one avenue to check to see its compliance, because one of your questions earlier was, how can you tell people have complied with you know, this requirement to get a zoning ordinance? And while you don't know where they are, you can look at the listings on the website to see if most people have that number listed on their advertisements, and that would give you an idea of how many people actually complied with the zoning permit requirement. And then as you have tracking the nuisance kind of complaints is another way to see sort of how it's working overall, and considering that to be a verified violation is a good idea. I think what you have here is a clean, good, high-level ordinance, and there isn't much that I can think of off the top of my hand that would make the enforcement section that much stronger.
Thanks, Rebecca. Commissioner Fox.
Commissioner Thomas Sulo, when you mentioned the reporting, did you articulate what would be included in that? What sort of metrics you were thinking?
I'd like to consider it a conversation, but I think it's understanding what information and data we have now. I mean, I've looked at AirDNA online. I'm sure all of you maybe have, now that everyone's, I don't know if we can actually download the actual, specific numbers with regard to, but I mean, it does show how many shared versus whole house there are at this snapshot. And I think it's a trailing 12 months. It does also bring up, it's like the other thing that we talked about at the beginning that I don't really know how this impacts the conversation, but that I can help and not look at that map and see that there's a significant amount of the whole house rentals in East Raleigh, and that is significantly driving a lot of the, transition and gentrification and forcing for housing to be unnecessarily price driven up. That's my personal take, but it's very hard to ignore that map. And I know some people were like, I don't see it, but there certainly are not a lot of the density of them in Mordecai or Cameron Park, or in University Village. There are a bunch right around State, but a lot of those are buildings and stuff, so it's a little bit harder to weigh that. That's just a little bit more context. But so those are the things that we'd want to understand is, where are they? How many are right now, and how many are added? And I trust you, hopefully, Roberta, but what were the stats a year ago? How did COVID impact it? Where are we at now? What average stays are? What the last year of average daily rate of occupancy are? Shared, and all of this shared versus whole house. How long they've been on market, how many new units have hit market. I think that's huge to see. That right there will be whether or not, this is really impacting things or not, is in the first 6 months is how many people both register and how many new ones hit online.
So at a high level, where the units are, the number of units, the percentage change, the number that are permitted, average stays, and then number of violations noted?
Yeah, I think that to this point, I think that once it's, I think that's valid, but I guess it's understanding what kind of violations. Because if it's someone who isn't pulling a permit and operating illegally, this is a noise violation, versus a confrontation. I think that those are all very different.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of that is also to feel like they have someone to talk to, a method to reach out. Yeah.
So I have a question, if that's okay. Going to maybe Mr. York or Mr. Rometta. If we are interested in recommending a reporting mechanism to the city council, would that show up in the text of the ordinance itself, or would that just be a recommendation along with the technical changes we've discussed?
My suggestion is it's just a recommendation and you don't put it in the ordinance. That's just a data report to council, and it doesn't need to be documented or required under the code for the city to do that.
Okay.
How many more days do we have on this matter before it needs to go to?
Man.
you need to make your recommendation today, and the commission needs to make their recommendation on Tuesday.
Okay. I'm still conflicted over the days. I like the ordinance and the changes that we've highlighted in yellow as written. I just I'm just not knowing what to do with the 60 days or moving it up to 156 as we've talked, or I just don't know what the number should be. I know we all agree that it should be more than 60, but I'm not sure what number we should stick on. So that's me personally where I'm hung up on. Everything else I'm fine with. I just want to do something about the 60 and see what number we should stick at to recommend it to full planning commission for next Tuesday. Any other commissioners' thoughts on that? Commissioner Tomatillo.
I like Commissioner Haver's initial kind of logic, and I know that with a lot of the data that Blaney was sharing about these institutional buyers, she was kind of alluding to the fact that if they can fill up each weekend, that it can justify them coming in and buying sight unseen. And so just out of, I think she was pretty adamant about it being less than every weekend. But, it's like every weekend. And I assume that why that 95 number's in there, because, I guess 104 would be every weekend, and it's about 10 days less than every weekend. I'm also a huge proponent of letting data drive things and holding ourselves accountable. And if this is approved in March and we have data starting that we supposedly already have with Airbnb, then part of this maybe I think should be that we have another report 6 months from adoption instead of kicking the, I could also see where it's like the goal line gets moved. And so if it is impacting negatively or is not having a negative impact, then it could be eased. But it also might have a significant opposite impact where it might have to be tightened up. So, I'd probably be between that 95 and 120, which is a little bit less than all 3-day weekends. But is, around that every weekend, expecting that you're not gonna, have every weekend, and that tightens up some of the motivation for some of these large institutional companies.
Commissioner Haber, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Matt, and I'm okay. Again, I was using those numbers as a point of reference, so I'm okay dialing it down. I'm not hell-bent on that. And I'm okay going with the lower number, and I agree with you. And I think this is what, Roberta, you were asking about, how we make sure that we're monitoring and revisiting this and how we sort of build that into what we're sending to council. And I'll leave that up to Bert to figure that out. But is there any interest in this committee that if we do ratchet the number down, that we do think about opportunities for special approval or potentially additional fees if there's a good reason to go above? Again, it's to get to your point, Matt, about that flexibility. Even if in 6 months the numbers are trending in the wrong direction, but we still don't want to unfairly impact folks that are doing it for the right reasons, so to speak. That's hard to define. But anyways, I just didn't know if there's any interest in that. I would probably say the further we ratchet the number down, the more interested I would be in trying to build something like that into there initially, especially if we're waiting 6 months or a year to revisit it.
Mr. Tomatillo, I see you about to say something.
Yes. Well, and I like to try and be rational and logic based with some of this stuff and not just pull things out of the air. And so let's think about, how I believe it was Ms. Kirshner who said that she was at about 70% occupancy for the year. It's like that's 255 days out of the year. And so half of that is 127. And so I guess part of me is thinking that it's like, even if she were operating at that capacity for the next 6 months and registers, and we set the number around 125 or 120 or 25, like she could still operating exactly as she is. And in 6 months, we'll have information that most likely that still the current council can make decisions on again. And whether that's relieving that number or realizing that it needs to go down. I also, it always is super frustrating when certain policy and check and balances straddle councils, because there's just so much frenzy. And I also know that whether it's explicit or not, that there's dark periods for staff to be able to work on certain things, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I'm trying to think about, okay, how do we not impact someone who spoke? She could operate in full. Obviously if they kept it the rest of the year, she'd be held more accountable, but it's at least, we're kind of sticking to a more data-driven approach, which I think is fair for everybody, especially since, whether we like it or not, Whole House has not been legal. And so it's also a little hard to value unlicensed, businesses in residential districts the same as every other business in town. And so we also just have to, we're looking out for the greater good of everybody, and we have to have in mind all small businesses in the community. This is impacting any of the folks who are subsidizing, their rent or health insurance or anything else that they are needing to share their house or rent a portion of their house out to do. We're really making sure that Airbnb is legal. It's just we're having a reasonable approach to Whole House with the consideration for housing.
Okay. Roberta, did you have any other comments before we start making a determination on the days?
Now I'll hold it.
Okay. Commissioner Hyper.
I do think you guys remind me, you folks, I'm sorry. I thought under the penalties though, for the revocation of permit, item 4B, did we decide not to consider changing 2 to 1? Why we would give 2 or more verified violations over a 365-day period, or did we scrap the 1 and stick with 2? I don't remember our last conversation.
I believe you had discussion at your last meeting about if they were more than limiting, if there was only 1 violation to the maximum number of days to revoke the permit at that point and not give people more than 1 opportunity for that particular violation. That's my recollection. I believe it was Commissioner Miller that brought that up.
Commissioner Thomas-Lowe.
So just to clarify that, Justin, you mean that if the violation, is number of days, then your first violation, it's revoked. Okay.
Correct. Instead of, someone renting for 61 days, getting a violation, and then renting for another 61 days.
Yeah.
I believe she wanted to revoke it after 1 of those violations.
Okay. And I guess how, I don't know if this is you or David, but how do you, how do you address a coffee shop that's operating, illegally, or any other business in the city that doesn't have any sort of zoning approval? How do you, I guess it even comes with a house. If you don't actually have a CO, or if you don't have a building permit and you're doing work, I guess that's even kind of falls into the same idea of violations. Like how does that work?
So from a zoning code enforcement standpoint, we are largely complaint driven. We don't have patrols of inspectors visiting every property in the city looking for violations. Certainly if an inspector is out and they see something that is potentially threatening life safety, public welfare, those sorts of things, obviously that would be treated differently. But on a day-to-day basis, almost all of our enforcement is going to come from a complaint driven perspective.
So I guess what are the penalties? Fees or tax liens, or if you don't have a permit?
The code, and David may be able to speak this better than me, but it allows us to assess civil penalties. I believe it can be as high as $500 a day for ongoing violations.
Yeah, I believe the dollar amount varies based on what the violation is. For example, messing with the trees that are supposed to be saved usually has a higher penalty, but there is a normal, or if you could say there's a normal zoning violation, carries with it usually a per diem. They issue a cease and desist, of a use. If it's a use that's not permitted, then there's usually hearings involved regarding that, and then there's a civil penalty and a per diem.
Thanks.
And I would just add, Commissioner Tomasulo, with these rules, I can't say for certain that we would, strictly remain under that type of operation. I mean, obviously the reason we operate like that is, a resource issues, right? Is having staff to go around and look at these things. That's partially the reason why we are mostly reactionary in that regard. But the language in here, for example, that just requires folks to, post the number on the website, that is an opportunity for a little more robust enforcement. And it's something that is a little easier to do than go out and, drive around all day looking for things. So I just wanted to get that point across that's how we operate currently for, 99% of our enforcement, but that's not to say we would do it exactly the same way for these types of uses.
I've got a quick question. This is relating back to Commissioner O'Haver's comments about the number of days that we decide on, and the lower number of days, then the more we want to talk about having extra set of conditions regarding the fees in lieu of going over those number of days. How feasible would it be to get that done by next Tuesday? If we say we decide on, say, 120 days, and then we decide on what additional language needs to be in there with regards to that 120 days, if a homeowner goes over that number with regards to the fees or penalties they have to pay, how feasible would that be for us to get that done by next Tuesday? Commissioner Thompson, let's see. I'm sorry.
I guess just to add to that, I guess before staff answers, I feel like part of where I was going with it is that the rationale is that could be something that is addressed at that 6-month mark if we set the time limit to where it's not impacting current businesses, and then it gives time for proper data reporting, because I mean that's going to be, then you're talking about like permitting an actual business, you know, and I feel like it's a much different level of fees, you know, into, well, are they going to have to register commercially with Progress Energy, with the gas, with the electrical company and gas company and the water, because it's all more expensive for businesses? You know, it's just, I feel like that there's a lot there that, you know, I'm also a small business owner. And so it's also just hard for me to sit here and know that I pay a ton more fees than one particular type of business. And so, you know, that's me personally, but you're a small business owner too. You know, it's, yeah. And anyway, that was kind of my thought, is that it could be worked up as part of that review, and it's there if it makes sense.
Commissioner O'Haver.
Yeah, CJ, I agree with that. I think that makes sense. You know, I like the way Matt sort of framed it to kind of keep going with business as is. And if that would be an opportunity that we can look at in 6 months, we have that opportunity so that we can really think through that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I could support that. I guess I just want to clarify too, Matt, that I wasn't, I mean, and maybe I just didn't do enough research on it, but I wasn't necessarily saying that all of a sudden you get kicked into a different classification or you're now a business and you've got to pay a higher number of fees. I just meant, is there a way to build in some flexibility that people aren't just, you know, wide open. We're not attracting the iBuyers, but if there was someone that ran into that situation, you and I have talked about this all the time with small businesses and how they're trying to come in and just trying to navigate the code to hold folks accountable, but still make it reasonable, accessible to do it. So I wasn't necessarily saying, okay, you all of a sudden your fees go up to a whole nother category. I'm just saying, you know, to try to hold someone accountable. But I like your approach, and I just wanted, you know, CJ, I could get behind that if you could, you know, let's maybe talk about that and revisit that in 6 months if it's necessary.
Okay. Justin, I saw you about to say something. I don't know if we answered what you were about to say.
I was just going to respond to your question about feasibility.
Right.
You know, certainly if you're just changing the number of days, you know, certainly we'll be able to get that done for Tuesday.
Okay.
Obviously, it depends on what the language is that you would like inserted, but I'm pretty confident we should be able to get whatever this committee decides to the full commission by Tuesday.
No, about that 6 month issue that we just talked about, would that be something that we wanted to add to the text, or would that be, how would we deal with the 6 month revisitation of the subject? That's just a vague question. Anybody can answer it. I'm not sure. Commissioner Thomas, I saw your hand first.
I'll punt to Commissioner Fox.
Okay.
I think that's what I was asking previously, and I think that piece becomes the side recommendation that accompanies the text.
Okay.
So based on my thoughts and what I'm hearing from you all, it's approving it as is with one technical revision to change the number of days to 120 days, and then also recommend the commission make a recommendation to the council to have reporting required, and the first report would be 6 months from the adoption.
I think that's what I'm hearing too. Correct. Oh, Commissioner O'Haver.
Yeah, just to make sure, Roberta, that additional recommendation to council to review in 6 months, are they going to end up folding that into this part of the ordinance? How does it become required? How do we make a recommendation that they look at it and then in 6 months they say we're not going to look at it?
That's a good question, because I think also if this weren't,
sorry, Bert.
Sorry. Well, I mean, it's just like say it pushes out to November and it's mid new election and we owe it to, you know, the constituents and the community to review it, and it gets lost in the shuffle. I mean, is there any way to hold accountability there?
Commissioner Fox.
I don't know that we're best suited to be in a role to hold people accountable, because our role is a review body making a recommendation, and we can hand that over, and then what someone does with the recommendation is their business. So I'm sorry, I'm making light of it, but I think that the point is, you see that there may be some challenges and some opportunities to improve it, but it's challenging to make recommendations about very specific items with zero data. So I'd move that we move it out of committee to the full commission with that technical revision, and then the side recommendation of a reporting mechanism.
And the technical recommendation is for 120 days. Okay. Before we second that, I see David, your hand was up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on that same section in on page 2I. There was discussion earlier that the way it was termed as less than 30 days was confusing. Did you want that to be revised to for rent for terms of not more than 29 days, just so it's a different number than's in the definition of short-term rental?
Yes, Commissioner O'Hara, I see your hand.
Yeah, that was going to be actually my comment, because we've talked a lot previously about how some of this is confusing and how we're trying to make this more accessible for us to be confused by it. I think as much as we can simplify it, I know that sort of splitting hairs, but if that makes it more understandable, yeah, that's kind of what I was raising my hand for. So you got me covered, David.
Okay.
Okay.
Assuming the rest of the commissioners agree with that. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'm fine with that. So I think we had a motion by Commissioner Fox, and I saw 2 seconds. I'll take the second from Commissioner Tomasulo. I think, were you seconding? Okay. So all in favor of the changes as proposed? Can I get a quick show of hands? Seeing none in opposition, it passes to full planning commission as amended. I think that is all we have today. Keegan, there are no more members, I don't think, willing to speak. Does anybody from the committee have any updates or anything they'd like to add before we adjourn? Tomasulo.
I guess just so I know, at Planning Commission next week, will we receive the full updated text?
Yeah, the full updated text will be uploaded to board docs before the agenda is published.
With the yellow highlights, the day change, and then the recommendation from David on wording.
Yes.
Just in prep, how will that how will the sidecar recommendation be? It will just be an additional page, or not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I guess that would be. So this will be a committee report item on Tuesday, and it will include the recommendation that you approve the text with the modification, and that the full commission also recommend to council that a report be compiled within 6 months, something to that effect. David, does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that usually what happens is, Matt, you would recognize CJ as the chair to give the report of the committee, and he would basically repeat Roberta's motion and report out that the committee recommended unanimously those changes, and that a report be prepared in 60 days. Recommendation to council that they have staff prepare a report in 60 days, or excuse me, 6 months. And so think the best way to handle it, and then that's what would be presented to City Council on the 19th.
Commissioner O'Haver.
To be clear, that was the question I was going to ask, but there are a lot of folks that might not be able to participate in the full PC meeting, and they're going to pull this information off board docs. And we received a lot of emails. A lot of those folks weren't able to join this call. So I think it would be important to include that recommendation. But if it makes sense, David, could we at least put some type of brief description in there about the program, the pilot program that we have set up, and that's the data that we're going to use so that the public who aren't able to participate in these conversations understand that it's not just some random report, back to Matt's point, that we're trying to base this on data and real stuff and not just some staff report. So I just didn't know in that recommendation, I want to make sure that's available in board docs, but if it would be possible to at least briefly recognize the fact that Raleigh is a pilot program, that the data is being collected and that it should be there. I just think that would be helpful for some of the public that might not be able to participate in these conversations.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to dictate what the motion would read. I was just making reference to the report. How it's described is, and I'll leave to Justin if we can get that in the staff report before it goes up on board docs. I don't know whether I'm trying to think of what the CR looks like. I think you can add a side recommendation, but I won't speak for staff.
We can, and we can also put that information in the blurb, the write-up that goes in board docs as well.
Thanks, Justin. Commissioner Fox, I saw your hand. Was that?
No, I was just going to recommend, I think if it shows up in the blurb for board docs, that's probably the most helpful.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Any other items that we need to address before we adjourn? Okay, seeing none. Guys, have a happy, good night, not a happy new year. That's already over with. Guys, have a good night, and we'll see you next Tuesday for Full Planning Commission. Thanks.